You know, memory is an amazing thing. Events and people and ideas from the past can not only be held in one's mind and used for the future, they can be imparted to others. And the truths that they reveal can be used by them in their lives as well. So right now, I'd like to recall an event that happened 30 years ago this week. I'd like to remember the fall of the Berlin Wall and why that creation still warns of the ethical and economic horrors of collectivism. Hi folks, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRCTV, and you know, for the purposes of this conversation, I'd like to forego a detailed history of the 1917 Russian Revolution and its bloodthirsty leaders and the vile manner in which generations of pop media talking heads and writers not only turned blind eyes to the evils of the USSR, but openly praised it and in some cases worked for it. Instead, I'd like to focus on that wall and what it did and meant. See, my uncle, E. Gardner Goldsmith, was on Patton's general staff. And I remember him mentioning how Patton implored his guys to get to Berlin as quickly as possible. Because Patton knew if they didn't beat the Soviets, the German population would be trapped by communism. He spoke of how FDR had already decided to sacrifice the Germans to Stalin, how FDR dismissed Patton's calls for more fuel, how Patton's soldiers literally tried to steal fuel on their march north to get in there and save those people from communism. But with the Soviets firmly entrenched in Germany, by the time the West arrived, the US, British, and French bowed to Soviet aggression. So as History.com writes, after World War II, the Allies partitioned the defeated Germany into a Soviet-occupied zone, an American-occupied zone, a British-occupied zone, and a French-occupied zone. Berlin, the German capital city, was located deep in the Soviet zone, but it was also divided into 4 sections. Thus, in June of 1948, the Soviets shut down rail and road routes to the Allied sectors in Berlin, and that ended up sparking the United States government to, contrary to the United States Constitution, become involved in the Berlin airlift to drop food and supplies to the beleaguered Berliners. And then months passed. West Germany, which would retain the core principles of private property, free trade, and movement, remained allied with the West, the so-called capitalist nations, while East Germany not only remained a satellite of the collectivist Soviet Union, its Soviet-backed police state in the early 60s began to construct a barrier between East and West Berlin. Thus, from barbed wire in the early 60s to its final monstrous literal and metaphorical concrete visage in 1968, the Berlin Wall saw families split, businesses destroyed, hundreds of escape attempts foiled at the ends of guns and bayonets.
We remember the woman being held by communist guards to prevent her from joining her family. They even threw tear gas at those who were below ready to catch her.
Some very fortunate people getting out on foot, through tunnels, and even in balloons, and all not to get from west to east, but to escape collectivism. Now, why would they want to do that? Well, for 2 key reasons. First, the ethics of individualism are clear and easily felt. Humans seem to have an innate revulsion to theft, aggressive violence, fraud, also another form of theft, and lies. But how individualism is essential in economics and why individualists knew that the wall would eventually fall are often missed. These economic facts are twofold themselves and assiduously avoided by collectivists. First, as the settlers of Plymouth Plantation in the 1620s understood and discovered, and as Governor William Bradford wrote at the time, forced collectivism promotes sloth and indolence at the same time that it fuels resentment in those who work hard and see their toil siphoned off by the lazy. Second, collectivism can't handle what's called the calculation problem in economics, which requires resources to be discovered, recognized by consumers, and then allocated according to how consumers value them. Under a collectivist system, such as what happened in East Berlin and all across the Soviet Union, this subjective valuation and trade system is blocked. No one can claim private property, and so, as Ryan McMaken writes for the Mises Institute, free market economists like Ludwig von Mises predicted the fall of the USSR because collectivism destroys private property, which in turn destroys the price system, which in turn makes it impossible to drive resources where people need them. Decades before the fall of the wall, Mises had shown that a socialist economy, by which he meant a centrally planned economy, could not possibly know what to produce, when to produce it, or for whom to produce. In explaining this, Mises proved that the Soviet Union, regardless of any victories it might have in remolding human nature, was economically impossible. Deprivation, starvation, and hardship always ensue when collectivism is imposed. Hence, East Berlin was a bleak wasteland full of hungry, desperate people, while West Berlin was prosperous, akin to what we see in the difference between North and South Korea now. And so, on this anniversary, we can look back with mixed emotions. At turns, one can be drawn to tears considering the horrors of collectivism, a system many Americans ignorantly promote today. But at the same time, one can celebrate the end of that system and learn why it failed because of its lack of individualist ethics and its attacks on individualist economics, private property, and trade. You know, I happen to own a piece of the Berlin Wall. Before governments like that of Germany and the ultra government of the United Nations made the ironic moves to use taxpayer cash to grab pieces of the wall that taxpayer cash was used to build, a few wily East German capitalists broke off chunks of it and sold them for profit. A fitting thing to do after so many years of oppression. And so here it is. The Berlin Wall, 1961 to 1989. It's certified on the back, tells where it came from. I see this as an emblem and a lesson. It's a lesson to beware of those who either refuse to acknowledge the crimes of collectivism or refuse to learn from them, even as they build the United States into a collectivist nightmare that future generations might have to escape. This, the physical embodiment of collectivism, to hold people in, to betray them, to destroy their freedom. Concrete. It was formed from an idea. The idea of collectivism forced on other people. This represents a lack of respect for one's neighbor's rights. This represents oppression. I've got it in my hand right now. This stood for over 30 years between families and friends, and it was put up by a political system that some people praise today. Incredibly offensive that they can stand there and push these ideas and not see the horrors that these things represent. How many people walked by this wall wondering what was happening on the other side, hoping they could get past it? This piece of concrete. It's unbelievable. But it can't stand against free people and the drives to be free. Something to recall on this anniversary that we can pass on to everyone we know. I hope you'll pass this video on to others as well. Thank you very much. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe, and visit MRCTV.org, because as I've mentioned, there's so many things happening at the website that we just can't mention in videos. For MRCTV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.